Greetings, fellow insomniacs, and welcome to another episode of the Creature Features podcast, where we listen to podcasts, YouTube, and Miami Fox streaming. I'm, of course, your host, your friend in fright. My name is Chunky Larry, and this is an episode that really, much like the film we're going to be discussing, came out of nowhere for me. I went and saw this film in the theaters last week. It was the debut of the film, and I had a very strong feeling about the film. Watching the film, I felt like, I'm going to talk about it kind of surface level on TikTok, but not really give anything majorly away. But I felt like this is one of those movies that deserved an intelligent conversation. And so I reached out to the world of TikTok for an intelligent conversation, and I got, I think, probably one of the most intelligent conversations. I've interacted with my guest this week several times, just talking about film and the ins and outs of film, and I always feel like we have I wouldn't say deep conversation, but about as deep as TikTok will allow you to get. This guy is informative. He's knowledgeable. He's a filmmaker. And I think that those elements are going to really do this specific film good. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sean Mannion, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I agree. I quite enjoy catching your posts on TikTok. Or videos, or however we call it, the talks on the tickety tack.
Yes, the tickety
and
talks.
Yeah, no, I love. Yeah, you're one of the people where I'm like, whether I agree with you or not, I'm gonna like enjoy hearing what you have to say about it, because you are very thoughtful about how you approach it. You're also very open to like, if other people have different opinions, it's fine. Like you want that, yeah, which I think is always a great.
I think that's the best way to get an understanding of what it is that you're having a conversation about. Is getting multiple perspectives, specifically people that are, articulate and intelligent, as opposed to that fucking sucked, and because you get a lot of that too. So that was tons, bro. I can't believe people fucking like this shit. It's overrated and underrated, and.
Yeah, and I will admit that I am sometimes I've been prone to that many times in my life, and I get that, but like also, yeah, it's kind of boring. It's like, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuance that goes into the film that I really enjoy, and I think that a lot of people look at stuff kind of on surface level, and I think that this specific film that we're going to be talking about is one of those films that you can enjoy on surface, but then you can excavate and find other things that you enjoy with rewatches. And so I'm really excited to have a conversation about this film, because I think that this is going to be one of the most interesting films that we get in 2025. And we've got some really good ones so far, but this one is, it just has a feeling about it that makes it feel special. And we have not mentioned what that film is yet, but we are going to be talking about the 2025 film Sinners.
I've been all over this world. I seen men die in ways I ain't even know was possible. Love you, brother. Be careful. I will. With all the things that I've seen, I ain't ever seen no demons, no ghosts, no magic. Till now. Hey, get back inside.
Let me in, man. Some weird shit going on out here.
You keep dancing with the devil. One day he's gonna follow you home.
Trying to leave their troubled lives behind, twin brothers Michael B. Jordan, return to their hometown to start again, only to discover that an even greater evil is waiting for them to welcome back. I read that terribly. That was written by Warner Brothers. So it's vague, but still, I feel we can go vaguer because we have a game on this where I have the belief that, you know, a lot of trailers and the way that people talk about films, like on social media, they give a lot away, and we are going to be getting into spoiler territory before we go any further. But we play a game on here called Synopsis Obscura, and basically, Sean, what I'm going to need from you is to explain Sinners without giving anything away.
Okay. So, Sinners, from a director, has an actor playing a character, and he returns to a town and meet some people again and meet some new people that are not very nice.
All right.
I feel like that's as obscure as I can get, and I feel like I still gave too much away. I was like, well, he plays them, but if I give there's you know, so there's a director who directed a movie with an actor who goes to a place, and he meets some people, and then he meets some not nice people.
Fair enough. That is vague. So Sinners is directed by Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler got his start with the film Fruitvale Station, and if I'm not mistaken, every film that Coogler has made, Michael B. Jordan has been in. Yes?
I think so.
Because he did Fruitvale Station.
I think so. I'm not
Creed,
super well. I know he's in
the two Black Panther movies. He's in
Black
both
Panther.
Those. And then Sinners. If there's one that I'm missing, I don't think I am.
I feel like I'm missing one, but I all his like features. Like I think he went from Fruitvale to Black Panther.
No, he went from Fruitvale to Creed to Black Panther.
Oh, you're right. I get Black Panther and Creed, the order reversed. So.
But they have a relationship that feels very much like Scorsese and De Niro, in the sense that you could tell that, you know, when a filmmaker finds like that person that really kind of understands their shorthand, that they don't want to work with other people. Robert Rodriguez has that with Danny Trejo. Tarantino has that with Samuel L. Jackson. Scorsese now has that with DiCaprio. And so there's this thing that I personally prefer, and it's, you know, seeing people working with the same people, and it feels familial. And, you know, as a fan of films, you like to see them playing in the same sandbox with each other. And I think just you know, speaking out loud, I think this is probably Michael B. Jordan's best performance. I can't think of anything that I liked more than this.
I think that's fair. I mean, one could ask which one, but I think in doing both of the brothers, it really is kind of an impressive performance. That's always difficult, and I do agree with you. I think I do kind of broadly enjoy when I see actors and directors working together and developing those relationships. As we said at the top, I'm a filmmaker, not nearly on this scale, low budget scale, no budget scale. And I like to work with the same people, partly because they put up with my crap, and partly because, like, when you spend that much time with people and invest that much of yourself in creating something, like, it makes a lot of sense that, like, Scorsese's working with De Niro and they worked on like Mean Streets and his early stuff together, and Coogler and Michael B. Jordan, Fruitvale Station, and then going forward with that, like, it makes a lot of sense because it's just like, hey, remember when we had to do it, like, when we were like, no, we didn't know if anybody was going to watch this. We didn't know if anybody was going to care about what we're doing. Let's keep going. Let's keep doing stuff. But yeah, when you spend that much time with people, you're like, yeah, I could find somebody new, but I already know I can spend 12 hours in a room with this person. So,
and again, they developed this shorthand, and so Coogler was on an interview. He did an interview with Mark Maron for his podcast, WTF. And he was talking about a situation where Michael B. Jordan was doing something, but he didn't feel completely engaged into it. And his direction to Michael was, what would Chadwick do? Because they worked with Chadwick on Black Panther, and it severely affected them both. The loss of Chadwick, obviously, they worked with him, but in talking about working on Black Panther, he expressed how he was older than the both of them, and he was like big brother to them. And so it's like, that one thing is kind of like a talisman for, like sticking your chest up and, like, because they understood that he was doing all of these things that he did and staying in the character T'Challa even when they weren't filming. And that's what Coogler expected of Jordan. And I think that, that only comes from working with someone for a long enough period of time. What they can and can't do, and you can have them rise up to a performance because that they can do better. And so Smoke and Stack are, the archetype of a lot of gangster films, these twins, these brothers. And one of the things that Coogler said about the characters of Smokestack was that, in hood culture, everybody knows about twins. Like, it's just kind of like, and it leans into kind of what the story is also about, these urban legends, these folklore tales of, obviously there's the deal at the crossroads with, the devil. That's just like a legendary story. Everybody's heard it, even if they don't know the specifics of the story, because that story has been told in multiple different scenarios where somebody is making a deal with the devil. The devil went down to Georgia is another example of that, where it's, fiddle duel. But, there's all of these stories over the course of time. Paganini, he was a violin player, right? And
I think so.
They'd set up this lore of him selling his soul to the devil to become an amazing violin player. Became folklore. So the idea of the twins is also that folklore. It's urban folklore, and there's tons of examples cinematically. Uh, the Craze is a perfect example of that. These twin brothers that were, you know, vicious, but they relied on each other, and so there's a lot of elements that are indicative of other things. And so, you know, there's the obvious one that's super fucking surface level. That is, of course, From Dusk Till Dawn.
Mhm.
And, you know, with the Gecko brothers and, you know, one being kind of reserved, the other one kind of being a wild card, and them, you know, balancing each other out and then losing one, and the other has to exist without that balance. And that's this movie, you know. But
Yeah.
then there are other elements of this film, but I want to just kind of let you kind of go on the idea of urban folklore as a storytelling template. Like, what are your feelings of that?
I mean, I think that urban folklore or you know, rural, either way, like it's 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 core, like it's core. It's like it's a visceral thing where it feels real, and it lends that to stories, you know, even though we know it's not, right?
Mm.
Like, you know, and it's the basis, especially like a lot of horror things will kind of pull from that. I always like to kind of think a little bit about I rewatched one of my favorites, Night of the Creeps, the other couple weeks ago, and you know, the beginning of that is just like several sort of little urban folklore, or not urban, sort of
Urban
suburban
legends.
urban legends sorts of things. You know, the escaped like lunatic sort of thing, like layered in all for the setup for the movie. But like they work really well because it's, you know, it's that thing, like it's the familiarity of it that helps bring you into the story, I think, because there are things that you would talk about like on the playground, right? As a kid, you know, you'd say, "Well, I heard this story about this and this and this," and you tell it. Maybe you were making it up, or maybe you'd heard it from somebody else, and you weren't totally sure if it was true. But I think it creates a good sense of it. But it's also, you know, it's that link to culture as well, which I think is very important in this film, in you know, various aspects of like how it's linking back to both their sort of urban existence, this plantation existence, and then when we get to and I think you already said that we're going to get spoilery, so I'll get a little bit spoilery now. The vampire being Irish and talking a little bit about, it's very like, it felt very Blink and You'll Miss It, but when they're having really their big confrontation towards the end, him mentioning like his land being taken, and that being sort of his land being taken by the person who turned him, and that sort of legacy of that. And I think that there's any kind of folklore in many ways is us trying to understand history. I spent 2 weeks in Ireland at the beginning of March, which is a very, like, folklore is not a thing of like, oh yeah, my grandma used to tell these stories. Like, there was a woman who was there at this retreat with me who was putting a candle in the window every night to keep the banshee away. You know, not an elderly woman or anything, like just a woman. And this is just a thing that they do, and or some folks do. You know, it's always a little bit of that. And there's this, because it's a link to our history, because it's a link to our community. Whether we are consciously acknowledging it or not, and I think it creates in storytelling, in kind of building our stories, I think it helps to create this rapport with the audience of like, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about our community, we're talking about our history, and we're talking about, in a lot of ways, we're also talking about our present, because the folklore is in reference to our history, but the history is what has built our present, and so it's building those connections for the audience. I think I addressed what you were asking, but also I think I just rambled for a minute.
I mean, legend is the foundation of experience, and you could argue that, you know, the Bible is an interpretation of historical incidents that have been weaved into a morality tale, and that, you know, the people that wrote the Bible were persecuted, and that our folklore derives from persecution, and that's in every aspect of history. If you look at, you know, the stories of Aesop, those are morality tales based on the time that they were made, and so that's a thing that continues to exist throughout time. Specifically, like, you know, you look at film has served as a mirror to what's going on in the world in its entire existence. And so it's the same in the sense that, you know, we are creating these folklores, these stories, these tales, and we don't look at them as that. But, you know, generations from now, they will look at these stories as allegories and you know, legend that will exist long after we're gone. And that's what the stories are about. And an interesting thing is, like, thinking about your grandparents and not looking at them as elderly people as you know them, but as the people who, much like you and me, were just trying to figure life out. You know, because at the point when you meet your grandparents, they've already lived their experience, and they're the legends of your experience. And so they are these figures that have been able to exist and kind of shape and be the foundation of your experience. But you can only really see you as, you know, you can only experience your life through your eyes. And so, you know, the way that my kids interpret, you know, who I am as a person isn't going to be necessarily who I am. It's going to be an idealized version of who I am. And, you know, they're not going to see my flaws and all of the bullshit that I've done. They're going to just see, oh, that's the guy that fucking fed me and told me stories. And, you know, like I always talk about how my mom would tell us, you know, Stephen King stories when it was like foggy or rainy, or, you know, and that's what got me into, you know, stories in general is that. And so, you know, she has already become, you know, folklore in her own respect. And so the genesis of this story is that Ryan Coogler was very close with his uncle. He was the oldest man in his family, and he spent a lot of time with him. He was obsessed with the Giants, and he would listen or watch Giants games on the TV or the radio, and then he'd have blues music playing on vinyl. And he was from Mississippi, and Coogler, when, you know, he spent time with his uncle, he didn't know anything about fucking the blues or the Delta blues or, you know, Robert Johnson or any of that shit. All of that shit was just like shit that he researched because his uncle had passed away, and he started listening to the blues to be closer to him, and he recognized that there was this connection in the sense that, you know, the blues in and of itself are the foundation for what we understand music to be now. And he understood that by listening to grunge music, of all things. He started listening to grunge music and he was like, this is this. And so one of his main talking points is that music genre is a type of segregation. And so, I mean, that idea in and of itself is interesting, specifically because, this story takes place in Jim Crow, Mississippi, 1932. People are picking cotton in the fields, but they're not technically slaves, even though they're under the oppressive thumb of the KKK, and there aren't options for them to venture out of that existence, with the exception of music. Music is the escape, and the blues is talking about getting away, getting to something better, and you think of the blues, you think everything is sad, and there's an essence of sadness within the blues. Of course, that goes without saying, but I listened to a lot of Delta blues in preparation for this conversation, and there's this weird longing for better, and that's what's sad about it, that your existence is pain, and you're dreaming of a world free of that pain. And you could argue that hip hop is doing the exact same thing. It's talking about the plight you find yourself in, and the boastful, bombastic, I'm rich, I've got this, I've got girls, I've got all this, is the escape from your actual existence, which is living in poverty, living in a place where you can be killed by people that live near you or the police, and so it's interesting in that respect, in the sense that you're looking at people that want to be free, that feel under the thumb of society, and they want to escape that oppression, and so they fight to have something more. And the twins, Smoke and Stack, they have this scene where they're talking to Sam, the guitar player, and he's talking about wanting to go to Chicago. And they said, it's like cotton fields that are just tall. Yeah. And so basically, you ever hear the song Hip Hop by Dead Prez?
I don't think so. I have some hip hop knowledge, but I will admit, despite my producing partner Nicole's attempts to help me along with it, because she has a lot of knowledge about it, I am still very weak in my hip hop knowledge. But I don't think I know that one.
So there's a piece of music in there where they say, these record deals won't pay your or feed your seeds or pay your bills, and it's it's basically saying that these people look at music as an escape, but they're still slaves, and so it's constantly the quest for freedom, and I think that you can look at it just solely in a racial understanding of what freedom is, but freedom is something that every person, every color, every creed is aspiring for, because we're all prisoners in a sense. We're prisoners to our responsibilities, our wants, our desires. We're prisoners, and it's a system of control that keeps us at bay, and we don't get to do necessarily everything that we want to do. And you see, you know, people that, you know, put themselves out on social media who carry themselves like everything is hunky fucking dory, that they're living this charmed life, and those are some of the most miserable human beings that I've ever fucking met. And
Yeah.
you know, it's a projection of what that they want. And so the twins, they go to Chicago, they come back because they realize that there is nothing out there that's any different than where they are. So, you know, why give up the familial connections? They can be big fish in a small pond down in Mississippi, or they're going to just be grunts working for either the Italian or the Irish mafia. And that is an interesting story because it is very similar to the offer that the vampires offer.
Mm-hmm.
And in the sense that, oh yeah, you could be free, but are you free? You're fucking doing Irish jigs. That's not you.
Yeah,
That's
you're
somebody
doing
else.
you're doing what he's driving. I think one of the things I did appreciate about it, and I agree with you. I think the first, like what you were saying about music, I think a lot of popular music, and I do think that you're right about, or the point is correct about like genre being a form of segregation, because many of the most popular songs or popular artists, like they're talking about that same like kind of desire for freedom. Like when you're talking about that, like I'm not going to exactly stand and defend it, but I am a hair metal fan, and I have been for a long time. But like, it makes me think of the Poison song, "Nothing But a Good Time." They just want to have a good time, and it's talking about working, and it's talking about like doing like whatever crap job so that he can just go out and have a good time on Friday night or whatever. But I think that it was also really. I think it was also really useful in this film to have that narrative there that like Chicago's not any better, because we have this myth in this country that, the North was always better.
Mm-hmm.
The North was always just a better place for people to go to. It's the South that's bad. It's like, no. It was bad all over. Like, it was bad. It's just like how it was bad. And it's just like, how explicit and how openly it was bad depending upon what groups they were. I mean, even that it's the Irish and the Italians, like, it's not like, by the 30s things had shifted, but it's not like those were two groups that had it great in America when they came over here. That's the whole reason their mafias existed and took hold, is because they didn't, because then they needed to survive. And the whole thing about the vampire in particular being Irish in the story, I think is important because of that relationship, because there is a relationship in America between the Black community and the Irish, that I don't have all of the details of course, because I'm no great historian. But did I freeze? Oh, okay, just on my end. I don't know a ton about all of it, but I do know that like there were shared struggles, and that at a certain point, at least some of the Irish community in the U.S. decided to throw the Black community under the bus. But I also know that there's a history of I listen sometimes to this Irish history podcast, and they had this great episode about that there was a church in the South, a Black church in the South, that was one of the biggest donators in terms of cash to the Irish people when the famine was on. Mm-hmm. A private one, as opposed to like a governmental setup. There was this church that just heard that the Irish people were dying in droves, and said like, "Hey, let's help them out." Raised a bunch of money, tried to help them out. There's a relationship there, and I think it's interesting that I think it's pointed that the vampire here is Irish, because there is that kind of, there is some shared history there, and not not in the sense of like, oh, we all had it the same, but rather like they're parallel. There's parallel struggles there, and that could have come together better at some points. And I think the film might be commenting on that to a degree. But I might just be mapping that to it myself. But that's also the kind of joy of stories and film, is like we bring what we know about to them, and so then they bring that, and then that kind of brings its meaning into it for us, even if it's maybe not necessarily where the filmmaker was going with it. But I do think that, I think that aspirational element is important to the film. It's important to music, which the film is, probably more about music in a lot of ways than it is about anything else. Like, which I was a little bit surprised. I tried to go into the film not knowing too much about it. I think I saw like a trailer on TikTok, and I was like, okay, Michael B. Jordan, Ryan Coogler, cool. And then it was like clear it was going to be like a horror film, and there was something going on, and I was like, okay, I don't want to know anymore. I'm just going to go and see it. And so every other time like a trailer would come in, if it looked like there was any more information, I'm like, swipe up. I don't want to know. Don't want to know. Just want to go in and find and enjoy it for what it is. Some movies I don't care if I know what's going to happen, and some I'm like, I want you to surprise me. I want to experience what this is, and so I just kind of try to avoid information. And this was one of those ones where I was like, let me just see what this looks cool enough from what I've seen. I'm just gonna avoid any details. So that it's so much about music, and it's upfront about that, was unexpected for me, but also just great. Like it was something that makes me want to go back and watch it again and kind of absorb more of that, and what it was saying about music and our connections to it, and how that's just the recurring thing throughout.
And so there's a lot of things I think that are allegorical to the experience of that particular time. And, the Chinese element of this story, I think, is one of the most interesting ones, because they do it in a very subtle way. And in that scene where Smoke shoots the guy in the leg, and he's reaching out to Grace, and I think it was his name, Bo.
I think so. Yeah. I think so.
And he, wants them to do the food and do the sign and all that shit. And so they have the daughter, Lisa, I believe her name is, go get the mom at the white store. She comes from the white store to the black store, and it's done so. Right. Like just one shot, like it's subtle that you don't realize why she works at a store across the street unless you really fucking like look at it.
It didn't click for me. Now that you're saying that, I'm like, that's why. Like part of me was like, what? They have two stores? Okay, they've got two stores. And now you're saying that, and I'm like, well, of course that's what it was. And but it's great that it is subtle like that. Yeah. Like, and important that it's subtle like that, because then it's just like, no, this is just what the background of this story is, and just like the understanding of the environment all of these characters exist in, and that we've got these characters who can exist in both spaces but don't really belong to either one in some respects. Yeah. And
so there's been some discourse about the Grace character, specifically her decision in the film to invite the vampires in. What were your feelings about that decision?
In the moment and watching the film, it was one of those like it both felt like, all right, mechanically we need to get to the climax. Mm-hmm. And It serves that, but it didn't bother me in that moment for that, because also emotionally I'm just like, she's just like, fuck it, like she's been pushed, and they did build it. It wasn't out of nowhere. They built it with the threats. They set it up with the daughter. Like the seeds are planted from a dramatic standpoint. It works. In the sort of sense of like, we're in the moment. I'm like, okay, we're doing this, but also in a way, I was just like, all right, like I'm okay with that. This makes sense to me at the moment. I think that there's probably, thinking about it in context of the conversation we're having here, I think there is that commentary, and again, like what I was saying about the Irish and the difficulty here in America of division and kind of sowing dissent amongst basically not white groups of people. Like,
so you remember the Watts riots, right?
yeah, I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
And you know that one of the big catalysts, aside from the Rodney King situation, were situations that were happening in Koreatown with blacks, and that was also like a catalyst for the way that things happened. And there was a kid, if I'm not mistaken, who was killed in a market, a Korean market, and that made them a target for when this revolution began. And so, it's a dissension that, these are both oppressed, people that, rather than, lashing out at their oppressors, they lash out at each other. And so, you've got these Korean markets being burned to the ground, Koreans on buildings shooting people to protect their stuff, and this pitting people against themselves rather than pitting themselves at the threat. And that was when I watched it in the theater, the first thing that my brain went to when she invited them in, is that, you can look at these people as equals, but when it comes down to it, your motivation is going to be self and not the whole. And so these people are both, put upon, and they find this common goal, but they're not necessarily not accepted, but they're not as accepted. And so you see specifically black audiences' reaction to her decision feel like you don't even belong here. You don't have a say in how we deal with this situation, even though she absolutely does. They're all under the same thumb of oppression, and it should be communicated. It should be a thing that they worked together with. But the fact that they didn't is ultimately what destroyed them all. Is that lack of communication, and that is in things like Night of the Living Dead, and in the sense that you guys are both in this situation where you have to coexist and commingle, and the inability to commingle is ultimately what is your destruction. And that to me is one of the more interesting things that's kind of said in this story, because that's Siege 101. In every Siege film, there are situations where people are put together and they have to either coexist or they're going to be destroyed. And more often than not, in these stories, in order for the story to progress, there needs to be some dissension that allows this to explode. And I fucking love the character Grace. Like, she's my favorite character in the whole movie. And again, we're way into spoiler territory. She goes out like a fucking badass.
Yes. She was delightful. Like you wanted like it's which is also great about
Yeah.
how they have her have that turn is because you do like her because even like when like I think as soon as like as soon as like they're in the grocery store and they're making the deal about making the sign and like the way that she is just dealing with him. You're just, I'm just like, oh, she's great. This is delightful. I love that this is how this is going. And so it makes it so much better that she's the one who does it. I mean, it makes it worse, obviously, but it also makes it better because it hurts more, right? That she's the one who damns them in this sense because exactly what you're saying. Like when it comes down to it, she was just like, no, I'm looking out for mine instead of ours. And they could have, and especially because it's not that much longer before the sun comes up.
Mm-hmm.
They could have waited it out.
And so that's the argument is do we hold out and possibly run the risk of these vampires going into town and killing our family, or do we fight and try to protect everyone? It may mean our end, but we're stopping this here. And it's so chaotic that, you know, and there's a lot of fear put in place that kind of stifles the decision to do that. And her thinking straightforward is just, I'm protecting my daughter. It's not her protecting everybody, but it is. Because, you know, that's absolutely what would have happened had they just held up and barred up everything, is they would have seen that day was coming and they would have just went into town, got as many people as they could, and then went under and blocked themselves out until it got dark again, and it would just continue to get worse and worse. So it's making a tough decision and being vilified for making the tough decision, but it's a decision that had to be made for the benefit of everybody else, even though that's not, I would say, what her motivation was. Her motivation was her daughter, and she was locked in on making sure that her daughter was okay. So it's that decision, I think, is one of the most paramount decisions in the film. But I want to talk about the music in this film, because I think that the music is just as much a character as anybody else in this film. And there's one specific scene, the oneer is what people are referring to it as, is this scene where Sam plays for the first time in the juke joint, and it having this power, this energy that kind of, and they set this idea up in the very beginning of the film where they talk about how music can pierce the veil between periods of time, and it's all connected and all of that stuff. And so they do this thing while he's playing where, you know, they go back into the past and you're seeing, you know, the tribal African drumming and dancing, and, you know, with the Chinese, you're seeing, you know, traditional Chinese dancing, and, you know, even with the Irish and the folk music that they're playing, and it's all indicative of, you know, existence and culture and identity, and it being kind of an amalgam. And, you know, then they transfer into the future, and you've got, you know, this kind of Parliament Jimi Hendrix Prince looking dude who's just wailing on an electric guitar, and you've got, you know, the dudes, you know, on the fucking ones and twos scratching records, and, you know, you've got African dancers next to girls twerking, and, you know, it just showing that these are fragments of our DNA, and that you can sense the DNA in every aspect of what it is that they're doing, and it's a fantastic idea that I feel, and this is probably, you know, where I get into the place where people aren't going to like what I have to say. It's ham-handed, ham-fisted in its approach, and so it's like I understood what they were going for, but at the same time, it's like this is kind of corny, and it feels after school special to me. Like it just
I get what you mean.
and like I love it, and I understand what they're going for, but I just feel like it's just so fucking hokey too, and you know, I equate the movies that Ryan Coogler is making to Steven Spielberg.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is that he's making these blockbuster Hollywood summer event kind of films in a way that there's still like roots. You know, it's not completely vapid, but but there's textures and layers, and you could say that about, I would say, 90% of Spielberg's work until about 93, 94. And then he's like, let's just make money. But all of his work kind of pre that, it feels like these are these tentpole movies that have, you know, their hooks in the ground. So they're able to lift up to the sky, but they're still rooted in reality. And you know, they're aspirational, they're large, while also having layers. Like, you know, a lot of Spielberg's work, most people just get that surface layer, and they don't dig deeper than that. And the same could be said for things like Black Panther or Creed. You know, that, you know, you get that surface layer, but you're not getting all of that humanity, and that humanity exists there, but it's not the focal point of the story. And so, in my opinion, I just think that Coogler could have done it better. It's an amazing like shot. It's an amazing energy. It's got an entire vibe to it, but it also feels like I'm just going to throw shit in here and people will understand what I'm throwing in here, but it just doesn't serve what I'm telling.
I can see what you're saying there. I enjoy that bit, which I think a lot of people probably do. I don't know how well that will hold up. I get the feeling that it's going to be. I think we sometimes have maybe a similar reaction to when people are like, "This movie's perfect," and it's like a movie that just came out, or "This is the most amazing thing." It's just like, it's a good movie.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like, I get real bothered by like that insistence. It's actually turned me off some filmmakers because you can't have a conversation about them. So like, I don't really watch Christopher Nolan movies anymore because I don't want to have. I like his stuff, but that's mostly because it's a little bit more fun to just interpret everything that he's doing as a comedy, and it makes a little bit more sense. But that's like when but you know, Christopher Nolan, like, I don't watch half of his movies anymore because the conversations about him are just like, look at this amazing thing he did, and I'm like, okay, it's fine.
It's funny that Nolan's brought up because that's one of Coogler's big inspirations is
I'm sure
Nolan.
And to my mind, he's exceeded the capabilities of Christopher Nolan in many ways as a storyteller, but that's a whole other conversation.
No, that's exactly it. You know, like, technically, Nolan is like,
technically he's fantastic, but as
story, it's
story and character, like like, not to make the conversation about him, but like the Dark Knight is carried on the shoulders of Heath Ledger to the point where it killed him. Like, you know, it's, but I will say, like, this sequence, it's one of those ones where I was like, okay, once I saw what was happening and I saw, like, okay, so you're visualizing this, and I can see how it's like, it's an awkward thing to, like, how do we visualize this idea that we set up the movie with? And I appreciate that. And I do think that, like, in the long term, it's going to be seen as more hokey. But there's a degree to which I'm like, be hokey, be cheesy, be whatever. And it worked fine for me. It's not necessarily my favorite part, but I was like, this is fun. This is interesting. This helps me understand, like, even though it's kind of set up at the beginning, it also kind of brings a little bit more magic into how it draws the vampire to them. And did I need that? Could you excise a lot of that and the story would be fine? I'm like, yeah, sure. But it was fun. It was kind of fun to see, like, how they were representing it, and that wonder, and that it's literally burning the house down because it's like that. And I don't think that in the long term, like, it's going to be well loved, mostly that part, mostly just because people seem allergic to letting things being a little cheesy and hokey.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot of cynicism with our consumption of film, as well as filmmakers that make films, and
Yeah.
it is not as commonplace for there to be films that are done in earnest. And the last time I could really, like, grasp something that felt earnest was the Wonder Woman film. That first Wonder Woman film felt unapologetically earnest, and there was no cynicism in what they were doing.
Yeah.
And there was room for tons of cynicism. Same thing could be said about Captain America, the first Avenger.
Yeah.
You know, both of those films have this whimsy to them that could be contrived as, you know, hokey or silly or kind of, you know, this is kind of corny. But you feel that they feel it, and that is ultimately what allows you to go on that ride.
Yeah, and I do appreciate, like, because a thing that always gets me is when people are like, I want things to be like, the way that they talk about things being grounded, or what they mean when they say grounded. They're like, we want it to be grounded and we want it to be real. And I'm like, I don't want it to be real. I live in the real world. Give me something. Give me something fantastic. I want something fantastic, even if it's a small thing, even if it's a small film. I want the fantastic. That's why I go to films. I want, grounding. What I want is, I want the grounding emotionally, and I want the grounding in character. I want to believe the characters. I want to believe the emotions, and I want to believe that you care about the story that you're telling. I want that grounding. I don't need you to ground things in physics or reality or any of that. And it is one of the reasons why a sequence like this, it's nice to have in a movie like this, because it is about sort of the raw emotionality of the moment of him playing, of how everybody gets into it, and that he has a magic to him, and that's kind of part of this story. And a lot of movies like this aren't allowed to do that. It's like, no, we gotta stay down here. We gotta stay what's real and what you could actually see, even though we're talking about vampires. And it's just let's not.
Remember the second Matrix movie?
Yes.
How they had that like scene where it's like a rave in that dystopian world or whatever.
Yeah, in the it's like a giant cave, and you've got this sea of people, and that's the rave thing. Yeah.
And so that's one of those things that people will look at and they'll go, ugh. And I feel like that's going to have that kind of visualization after people have seen, like, I think that first hit of this moment a lot of people are going to go, wow, that was fucking amazing.
Mhm.
And then on rewatches, they're going to go, this is not great.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a certain element of kind of too much.
Mhm.
And this is just it's like 2 minutes long. This sequence is at most a 2 minute sequence, but I feel like it is so saccharine that, you know, on that first swing of the bat, it's like, oh, this is pleasant, but this is a film that I think people are going to watch multiple fucking times, and they're going to watch it multiple times to understand and delve into the layers of what the story is, and this is completely open for all of that. But I think that, you know, upon these reviewings, that sequence is going to not have the same bite as it did that first time, and it's going to be like when you put too much sugar in your coffee. You're still getting coffee, it's still giving you that thing you want, but like you taste it at the back of your tongue, and it's like, I'm gonna shit real hard because of this. You know what I mean? Like it's too much. And I there were a couple of performances in the film that felt that way to me as well. Haley Steinfeld, to be specific, and I felt like they were going for, you know, 1930s spunk and moxie, and being the only half black person in the film, and being, you know, a white passing black is ostensibly what she is, and that experience, I feel, is told in a very flippant way. And I think that it's hard for people to understand what it is to be multiracial, to have these elements of your identity that are one way and elements of your identity that are another way, and not being accepted by either side. And, you know, Smoke, even though her mother took care of this Smoke and Stack, he wants nothing to do with her. He sees her as trouble. And it's because of the world that they exist in at that period of time. But I would also argue that there is a pushback from the black community for people, much as myself, who are white and are black and don't fit into either world. And I think that, you know, the allure of being a vampire and being accepted is much more attractive to someone like that than, you know, somebody who's accepted by their culture. And so I think that her character needed maybe one or two more swings at the bat of like really refining who she was, because everything felt like she was inconsequential, even though she's one of the more important characters in the film. You know, Smoke and Stack, they both have these romantic relationships that are the foundation of who they are as people. You know, Smoke is, you know, very traditional, very stoic, very solemn. Stack is a wild card who, you know, doesn't necessarily fear the danger of something, but he does it with a charisma that makes it feel like he's nonplussed. Where, you know, it I think that those, you know, those two characters are two sides of a coin, but I think that there's much more love and attention showed to Smoke's relationship than there is to Stack's. And again, you know, just interpreting, it feels like it's, you know, Smoke's relationship is more accepted than Stack's relationship. You know, culturally at that time, but also in the eyes of the filmmaker. And that's just my interpretation. And so
Mhm.
I feel like, you know, she feels obligated to be tough, but it's not really explored, so you only get this one note, one dimensional character. And I think that there's places that they could have gone to express that in a better way, and that didn't work.
I think that I would agree with you in a lot of ways because I didn't think that she was going to be as sort of pivotal as she ended up being. I thought she was going to be a much more throwaway character. I was like, oh, okay, she's here. I get what she's doing. I get where this is coming. And then, as it goes, she becomes more of a turning, like she becomes more important to it than I was expecting. Um, Especially like in the third act there. Um, and it really isn't interested in her very much. Like the film is like even at the end,
Yeah,
at the after credits, the mid credits scene, it's not even really interested in her when we see Sammy in the future and we
yeah,
see them encounter in the what is it 1992,
yes, sir.
like it isn't interested in her. And I like I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it because I can see why it's more interested in other characters. I was more interested in other characters, even with where she's sitting in the film,
Mhm.
her importance to the plot. I'm still just, and I think it is the writing. It's like what I didn't have a strong hook for her other than, oh, it's Haley Steinfeld. Okay, I like Haley Steinfeld. Like she's enjoyable to watch. And she had the sassy or spunky moments or however that 30s attitude that like I don't care if nobody accepts me, I'm gonna be where I want to be sort of thing. And you kind of like that, but at the same time, like I was just much more interested in the other love interest, whose name I'm spacing on because I'm terrible at
Yeah,
names.
I totally spaced on her name too. But again, it's the way that she's portrayed as opposed to the way that Haley Steinfeld's portrayed.
Yeah.
She's the way that they film everything about her. It feels very earthy and natural and love, and like everything about her is love, and everything about Haley Steinfeld's character feels like it's just sex, and
Yeah.
that is also kind of like, to me it's a problem because you know they both characters, Smoke and Stack, end up with their beloved for eternity in different
Hmm.
ways. And so he has the eternity of heaven and love, Smoke, I mean, and then Stack is an eternity of you know existing but not existing. And you feel the sadness of him because specifically in that mid-credit sequence when he's talking to Sam, he said, it was one of the greatest days. I cherish that day. It was the last day that I got to feel the sun on my back. It was the last day I got to be with my brother. And it basically implying that his love of this woman drove him away from his family.
Hmm.
And I just like, that is, again, just it's problematic to me is that, you know,
Yeah.
they they did this where, the one who chose a traditional black relationship finds, his peace, even though they, are destroyed. They're both destroyed. One finds peace. The other is just, he's a prisoner still. And,
Hmm.
uh, they talk again, to go back to this, about freedom. That was the day that they felt most free. Everybody felt free in that brief period of time before everything went bad. And, you know, Sam says, I had nightmares about this moment, I at least once a week my entire life, but I still look at that as one of the greatest moments of my life. It was the only time that I ever felt free.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, being unencumbered by the rules of society and, this world that we see ourselves in. And I think it's really interesting that, that mid-credit sequence takes place in 1992, because again, that is when the Watts riots happened, was in 1992. So there's an interesting dynamic to be had with that. But I want to talk, before we get out of here, about Sam and Delroy Lindo. Because Delroy Lindo is the star of this fucking movie. Like he is.
Delroy Lindo is the star of any movie he happens to be in for even a minute.
He steals every fucking scene he's in, dude. And there's this scene when they're in the car and he tells this horrific fucking story about, because they're driving by the guys working for the prison. They're singing songs as they work, which is where a lot of the early recordings of the blues was done. Somebody went out and they went to these chain gangs and they recorded them singing. And, the music is indicative of the blues because that's what they're singing. They're ostensibly slaves, and he talks about this awful thing, and then the way that he makes peace with it is by singing, and it's just that whole thing, that whole moment just feels like the thesis of this entire fucking story, is that the world is an awful place, but no matter the terrible things that are done to you, you have this escape. It's this key in your head that can take you out of your reality and put you into this other reality. And I find that scene is much more impactful than the oneer in the club, in the juke joint, because it is done subtly and it really resonates to, life is terrible, but that ain't bad harmonica. You know what I mean? Like, I fucking love that. And then Sam, the story is, a battle for his soul ultimately, because in the beginning of the film, you're introduced to his father, who's played by Saul Williams, which is in and of itself just fucking like, I if you've seen Slam, having him play the preacher, I was like, oh, that's fucking beautiful. But it's him dealing with understanding what is fate and faith. And so, a lot of these blues musicians were sons of preachers. And, that musicality comes from the church, and the church being kind of, representative of, again, those people playing drums in Africa and these witch doctors and all of this shit. And like, it's an indoctrinated version of that. You'd say, Baptist churches in general are indoctrinations of Christian fundamentalism that was enforced on these people. And it's kind of a amalgamation of culture and indoctrination. And, there's this vibrancy to it. You also understand that there's pain. And then the scene with Sam and the main vampire, when they're in the water and he's praying and he's like, and he starts reciting the prayer with him. He was like, those words were said to me when my people were taken. And it's basically saying that these words that you're using as a shield aren't your words, so they hold no power. They're somebody else's words that were forced on you. And I fucking love that. But
I didn't catch that, but that's great. What I did catch was that that the charm that she gave him was keeping him from getting bitten.
Mm-hmm.
And that and so that the way that that's going together, I'm like, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Like it's that history is protecting them. It's their own culture. Yes, that is insulating them from the evil. So
let's get into Reapers for this, because I feel like we'll be here forever if we don't do that right now.
Yeah.
0 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. Where are you coming in for Sinners?
I put it at a 4, for sure. Like, I loved it. I'll probably watch it again many times. It didn't totally blow my mind, but it was, it's up there for me by a lot. Yeah.
I'm also going to go with a 4. I feel like this is an important piece that will absolutely stand the test of time, but I don't necessarily think that it's without its flaws, and I've tried my best to express those flaws, but it's not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination, so I would only give it a 4. But we're gonna get out of here, you guys. Sean, where can they find you on social media?
I'm Uncle Sean on just about everything, so if there's an Uncle Sean and it looks like me, that's me.
All right, and we're Creature Pod everywhere, so thank you guys for checking us out. By all means, go give Sean a follow and subscribe to Miami Fox Streaming. It's only $2.99 a month. With the promo code CreaturePod, you save yourself 15%, not $15. But that's going to do it for us, ladies and gentlemen. For Sean and for myself, again, my name is Chunky. This has been another episode of the Creature Features podcast. Listen, someone you trust.